Hello, Algebra. So I figured what would probably be most useful at the moment is if we took a step back and went through some of the problems from the past couple homework assignments, because I'm still missing quite a few of those, and I think part of the problem is we just might not be quite sure how to get started. So I'm going to go through a couple examples from each of the assignments. If you're only stuck on like one of the assignments, feel free to go ahead and skip to the part of the video that's about that part. We're going to go in order. So first assignment, second assignment, third assignment. So feel free to skip through if you're good on the first one. Go ahead and jump to the second one. If you still need a little bit of work on the first one, we're going to start with that one. So we're going to go through a couple of the problems on the homework for each of them. Just give you a little nudge to get started. So if you're on the one that's on page 507, we're going to talk about number 14, because this one had some positive, negative stuff going on. So if we're looking at number 14, remember these ones we're looking for numbers that are going to multiply to this last number. So we want things that'll multiply to that. And in this case, we're going to want things that are going to subtract to this number. And remember, what tells us if we're adding or subtracting is this last number here. Because if we're thinking about what's going to happen when we FOIL this back, if this is a positive and that's a positive, this number would be a positive. If those were both negative, that number would still be a positive because a negative times a negative gives you a positive. So the only way we're going to get a negative here is if we have one of each. But that means when we FOIL this back out, we're really going to be subtracting those two things because we'll have one that's positive and one that's negative. So if you want to think about that as subtracting, or if you want to think about that as adding a negative, we're looking for a positive and a negative that are going to give us that 8. So we're looking for things that are going to multiply to 48. So we're looking for things that go into 48. So we're just going to start listing some things off. So 1 goes into 48, and it goes in there 48 times. 2 goes into 48, because we know 48's even, so 2 has to go into anything that's even. So 2, and again, if you're looking for that other number, you can take your 48 and divide it by 2. That might be one you know off the top of your head. That gives you 24. And we're just going to keep counting up until we hit things that don't go into 48. So 3, does that go into 48? And if you're not sure if that goes into 48, just go ahead and take 48 divided by that number and see what you get. And I'm betting you got 16. Okay, and we're going to keep going. So 4 goes into 48, and if you happen to know off the top of your head, 4 goes in there 12 times. Cool. If not, go ahead and take 48 divided by 4. That'll get you that 12. Okay, 5 doesn't go into 48, because 5 only goes into things that end with 5s or zeros, so not 5. 6 goes into 48, and 48 divided by 6 gives you 8. And 7 doesn't go into 48, and then 8 does, but that's a repeat, so we don't need to jot it down again. So these are our 5 options for things that could give us 48. And we're looking again for the ones that are going to subtract to 8, which is good because there definitely aren't any that are going to add up to 8. So we're looking for things that'll give us 8 if we subtract them. Okay, well 48 minus 1 is 47, it's not that one. 24 minus 2 is 22, it's not that one. 16 minus 3 is 13, it's not that one. Ooh, 12 minus 4. That gives me 8. So that tells me the two things I want there. Alright, these are A's, not X's. And we want a 4 and a 12. And no, it doesn't matter which one goes where, but it does matter which one gets the positive and which one gets the negative. Because in order to end up with a positive 8 here, your bigger number is going to have to be positive. So that 12's got to be positive, and that 4 has to be negative. So that's what we're thinking is the answer, and again, any of these, feel free to go back and double check them by saying, okay, if I FOIL this back, I've got an a squared. A times a 12 is a plus that 12a, minus that 4a, and then minus goes with that 4. 4 times 12 is 48, and sure enough, if we add those up, if we combine some like terms there, 12a minus 4a gives you 8a, positive because the positive 12 is bigger than the minus 4, and we've got a minus 48 there. And sure enough, that's what we started off with, so we know we factored that right. So any of these, if you're not quite sure if you got it right, feel free to go back, FOIL it, and check and see if it FOILs back to the thing you had originally. If it does, you did it right. Okay, so that's number 14. Oops, I knocked something off there. Okay. Now we're going to look at number 20. We're going to look at one of these ones that has an equal 0 on the end. So these ones we're not just factoring, we're actually going through and solving for x. But we're going to start off by doing the same thing. So we're going to start off by looking for factors of 12, and this time, since that's a plus, we want things that are going to add up to 7. And in order to get that to be a negative 7, both of those things are going to have to be a negative. Because if I have a positive and a positive, I'm not going to get that negative there. If I have a positive and a negative in some order, I'm going to get what I had last time, where I'm taking a positive times a negative, and I get a negative here. So in order to get a negative here and a positive there, it's got to be a negative times a negative. It has to be. Which means that we're looking for numbers that multiply to 12 and add up to that 7. So factors of 12. 1 goes into 12, 12 times. Don't miss the easy ones. 2 goes into 12 6 times. And again, if that's not one you know off the top of your head, that one probably is. But if it's not, just go ahead and take 12 divided by 2. That gives you the 6. Okay. And 3, we're just counting on up here. So try 1, try 2, try 3. If one of those numbers hadn't worked, we'll just go on to the next one. So 3 goes into 12 4 times, and there we can stop because we've already hit 4. That's the next thing, but we've already got it. So once you got to a number that you've already got over here, you don't have to keep going. Now, I mean, you could. You could go 4 and 3, and then 6 and 2, and then 12 and 1. It's not going to hurt anything. It just takes extra time. Okay. So better to have too many things here than not enough. Okay, and these are x's this time, not a's. And we're looking for the ones that are going to add up to that 7. So if we're looking at, okay, 1 and 12, that doesn't add up to 7, that adds up to 13. 2 and 6 adds up to 8. Close, but not quite. 3 and 4 are what's going to give us that 7. And this time we've got that equals 0 on the end there. I'm going to erase this. Which means that we're actually solving for x, so we got that little extra step at the end where we're saying if these things are going to multiply to 0, then either this thing is 0 or this thing is 0. So either x minus 3 equals 0 or x minus 4 equals 0. And then we're just solving for x. So we get rid of subtracting 3 by adding 3. Those are gone. We're getting rid of subtracting 4 by adding 4. Those are gone. 0 plus 4 is 4. And those are our 2 answers. And again, these we could either check by foiling this back and seeing if that foils back to this, or once you're here, you can plug that 3 back in and go, okay, well, if I take 3 squared minus 7 times 3 plus 12, does that give me 0? 3 squared is 9. 7 times 3 is 21. 9 minus 21 is a negative 12 plus 12. And that part you can just plug into your calculator, so I'm not going to stress on that part. But that's just another way to check and see if we got our answers right there. So if you plug them back in and they give you 0, you did it right. Smiley face. Okay, I miss you guys. Okay, at least one of you would probably have laughed at that smiley face. Okay, so going on to the next section there, we've got one of these ones. So these are the ones where we had something in front of our x squared. So again, this is on page 513. Come on, marker. There we go. Okay, so we're on page 513, and this is number 10. So if you're looking at number 10 going, numbers, I don't even know where to get started on this. This is how you get started on this. So we're going to take that 5x squared, and we're going to stick it in a box. So we're going to stick that 5x squared here. We're going to stick that 24 over here. Okay, and now we're multiplying those two. So your first thing goes here, your last thing goes here. We're multiplying those. 5 times 24 is 120. And that gets an x squared with it. Okay. And then we're looking for factors of 120, and there are a lot of them. There are a lot of factors of 120. I get it. So if that's where you're getting stuck, I don't blame you. So we're looking for factors of 120 that are going to give you 34. So it's kind of tedious, but we're going to do the same thing. We're going to start off with 1, and we know 1 and, now my mark's not working, 1 and 120 work. Obviously, that's not going to give us 34, but we're going to be complete here and list out everything. So 2, and again, if you're not sure what times 2 gives you 120, go ahead and take 120 divided by 2. That gives you 60. And we're going to try 3. 120 divided by 3 gives you 40. And we're going to try 4. 120 divided by 4 gives you 30. Now, if you happen to realize here that 30 and 4 are going to give you that 34, you can stop there. If you didn't happen to realize that and you went on and you said, well, 5 and 24, because that's how we got the 120 in the first place, and 6 and 20, and 7 doesn't work, 8 doesn't work, 8 does work, 8 and 15, 9 doesn't work, 10 and 12, 11 doesn't work. And again, if you're not sure if it goes into it, just take 120 divided by that thing. So if you're looking at that going, well, I don't know if 9 goes into 120, just take 120 divided by 9. If it gives you something that's a nice whole number, it goes into it. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And again, if you happen to realize back here that, whoops, I circled the wrong one there. If you happen to realize back here that we're looking for 34, so 30 and 4 are going to give you 34. If you happen to realize that before you go through and list off all these extra factors, that's fine. You can stop there. I was just being complete here. So we've got a 4 and we've got a 30. And those both get x's. Because we want a 4x and a 30x to add up to that 34x. Okay. Now, this is the kind of tricky part that you gotta remember what's going on here is once we've got everything in our box, I'm gonna scoot some of this out of the way because we're kind of done with that. Once you've got everything in your box, the thing that you're looking for is you're looking for the biggest thing that goes in each row and each column. So we're not like multiplying these, we're looking for the biggest thing that goes into both of them. So we're looking for our greatest common factor, if you want to use that term. So what goes into both 5 and 4? Well, not a whole lot. 1 does. So 1, and then we've got an x squared and an x here. So you could either call that a 1x, or you could just call it an x, and that would also be fine. And then if we're looking at 30 and 24. Okay, well, 2 goes into both of them. 3 goes into both of them. But 6 is bigger. So 6 is the thing we want there. So if there's more than one thing that goes into both of your numbers, you want to make sure you get the biggest thing. So if you're stuck, it's a good idea. I can talk. It's a good idea to start with your smaller numbers. So if we're looking for things that go into 24, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 does, 8 does, 12 does, 24 does. And then we're looking for the biggest one of those things that goes into 30. So 1 goes into 30, 2 goes into 30, 3 goes into 30, 4 doesn't, 6 does, 8 doesn't, 12 doesn't, 24 doesn't. So these 3 do, but 6 is bigger, so we want the biggest one. So you're always looking for the biggest thing that goes into both of your numbers. So if that's not something you can figure out at the top of your head, just start listing off numbers that go into your smaller one, see which ones go into your bigger one. Or technically vice versa. Usually easier to start with smaller one. Okay, and the reason it's easier to start with your smaller one is you generally have fewer options. Because if I'm looking at this 5 and this 30, really my only options for what is going to go into 5, my only options there are really 1 and 5. So 5 goes into 30, so that's the one we want. If 5 hadn't gone into our second number, then we just want the 1 again. And again, we want an x there, so again, in general, as long as you put your x squared thing here, and as long as you put your thing without an x here, your things here are going to be the things that have x's, and your things here are going to be the things that don't. And we're looking for the biggest thing that goes into 4 and 24, and again, easier to start with your smaller number. The only things that are going to go into 4 are 1 and 2 and 4. All of those go into 24, so we want the bigger one. And then if there's not a minus hanging out, because we said we had a plus here and a plus here, anytime you have a plus and a plus, you're going to have 2 pluses. So we've got a 5x plus 4, and we've got an x plus 6. And again, order doesn't matter, so that could either be a 5x plus 4 and an x plus 6, or an x plus 6 and a 5x plus 4. Either one. Alright. On to the next one. And we're going to take a look at number 14 because that had some fun and negative stuff going on there. Negatives. Okay, but we're doing the same thing. So we're still going to take that and we're going to stick it in a box. So I'm going to draw a little box here, and 2x squared goes in your first box, and I'm going to put a 9 along with that. Just so remember that we want that to end up as a negative. And all that's really telling us is, in the end, one of our factors is going to be a positive, one of our factors is going to be a negative. So that's what's going on with that negative there. That's just saying we want one positive thing and one negative thing. Okay, and then we're taking that 2x squared times that negative 9, which is going to give you an 18x squared, technically negative, but again, all that's really doing is saying we want one positive thing and one negative thing. Okay, and then we're looking for factors of 18, and this time we want them to subtract because we have that minus there. So anytime you have that minus as your last thing, we're going to subtract to your middle number, which is good because there sure aren't any factors of 18 that are going to add up to 3. Okay, so if we're looking for things that go into 18, 1 and 18. 2 and, again, if you're not sure, take 18 divided by 2. That gives you that 9. 3 and, 2 and 9. Could have also figured out because that's how we got the 18 in the first place. 18 divided by 3 gives you 6. 4 doesn't go into 18, and again, if you're not sure, just take 18 divided by 4. It gives you a decimal, so we don't want it. 5 doesn't go into 18. 6 does, but we've already got it. So once we're here, we can stop, and then we're looking for the numbers that are going to subtract to 3. Okay, well, 18 minus 1 is not 3. 9 minus 2 is not 3. 6 minus 3 is 3. So we're going to have a 6x. We're going to have a 3x, and in order to get that to be a negative 3, that's going to be a negative 6x, so I should have left myself a little bit more room there. That's going to be a negative 6x. Okay, and all that's really going to do is help us figure out which of our things is going to be negative. Because if we're looking at the biggest thing I should use a different color, that we can pull out of each row, biggest thing that goes into 2 and 6 is 2. Because the only things that go into 2 are 1 and 2. 2 goes into 6, so that's the one we want. Then the next comes out with it. And again, these are going to both be your x things. Alright, and if we're looking at a 3x and a 9, 3, your only factors of 3 are 1 and 3. 3 goes into 9, so that's the thing we want. Just an x here because there's nothing bigger that goes into 2 and 3. So if you want to call it a 1x, that's fine. That's not going to hurt anything. If you just want to call it an x, that's fine too. This is where that negative becomes important because both of them have one. So that tells us, okay, that's the one that gets a minus there. And you could either call it a minus or you could call it a plus, a negative, just don't do both. So either a minus or a negative, just not both at the same time, because that would give you positive. Okay, and the biggest thing that goes into 6 and 9 is 3. So here we've got a 2x, and that one didn't have a minus, so that's a plus 3. And that's an x minus 3. And again, any of these, feel free to FOIL them back and say, okay, well, 2x times that x gives me a 2x squared. 2x times that minus 3 gives me a minus a 6x. 3 times x is a 3x. 3 times 3 is a 9. That gets a minus because there's a minus there. And then if we combine our like terms, a negative 6 and a positive 3 are going to give us a negative 3x there. And sure enough, that's the thing we started off with. Now, just watch out for if you're doing that, that's not your answer. This is still your answer. This is just us double checking the answer to make sure it's right. This is still the answer. Okay. And I hope we're good on that one. Okay, so last section. Last section of stuff are the things that look like this. So, if we've got a w to the 4th minus a 625, okay, these were the weird ones. So these were the ones where if we have a w to the 4th, instead of having a w and a w when we factor it, we're going to end up with a w squared. Okay, so you got a w squared there, and then the thing we're looking for is we're looking for a positive and a negative of the same thing that are going to give us 625, which is a big number. So if you were looking at that big number and that's why you stopped and you went, I don't know what goes into 625. Okay, if we know that we're looking for two of the same thing, the thing that we're looking for is going to be our square root. So if you happen to know off the top of your head that the square root of 625 is 25, cool. If not, I didn't expect you to. Find the square root button on your calculator and plug in the square root of 625. So anytime we know we want a positive and a negative of the same thing, we're really just looking for our square root. And the reason we know we want that is we don't have a middle term there. So if we just have, well, in this case, a fourth, where if we had a fourth or a squared or a sixth or something even here, and then we don't have a middle term before our minus a something, we know we want a positive and a negative of the same thing, because when we FOIL that back out, those two terms are going to cancel. Because if I took this and I FOILed it back out, I'd have this w to the fourth. I'd have a minus a 25w squared plus this 25w squared, and then minus that 625, which doesn't look like this quite yet, but these two are about to cancel, because if I have a negative 25w squared and a positive 25w squared, that's 0, that's gone. So this is really the same thing as this. And that's what's getting your middle terms to cancel out, is if you have a positive and a negative of the same thing there. But we're not quite done, because we can do it again. Because 25 also has a nice square root. Now, importantly, again, this only works if that's a minus there. So this part here that's a w squared plus a 25, that's going to stay. So this stays the way it is. This part we're going to factor again, because 25 has a nice square root. So we can say this is a w and a plus and a minus. And then the square root of 25, that one you might know off the top of your head, that's 5. Again, if that's not one you know off the top of your head, don't sweat it, plug it into your calculator, square root of 25, that gives you 5. Okay, and again, that positive and negative is what's canceling out your middle term there, and we can't do that again, because that's a plus, that's a minus, but it's not a w squared, so we can't do that again. We can't factor it out any more than that. So this is the thing that we want, this whole thing here. All right, that's number 18. Okay, one more. All right. So you may notice we can't do that right away with this one, because 5 doesn't have a nice square root, 20 doesn't have a nice square root. That's not even an a squared or an a to the fourth or anything we can do that with. So we have an extra step at the beginning here. We're going to look for anything that we can take out of both of our terms before we start factoring it. So what goes into both 5 and 20? And again, easier to start with our smaller number. The only things that are going to go into 5 are 1 and 5. So does 5 go into 20? Yes, it does. And again, if you're not sure, take 20 divided by 5, see if it gives you a nice number. If it does, it goes in there nicely. And while we're at it, we're going to take out that a, because both of these have an a. Okay, so that 5 is gone. If we divide an a out of an a cubed, that's really a cubed divided by a. And remember, those a's aren't going to cancel, because anytime we have an a, that's really an a to the first. And if we're dividing things with exponents, we're subtracting our exponents. So that's an a squared, which is convenient, because that's the sort of thing we can factor now. Okay, and we're going to subtract, because that's minus. And 20 divided by that 5 gives you 4. That a is gone, because that was just an a to the first over an a to the first. So those ones are gone. Okay, now we can factor it, because now 4 has a nice square root. So this 5a just needs to not disappear. And now I've got an 8 and an 8. And the square root of 4 is 2. So 2 plus 2 minus 2, because that's what's going to get those middle terms to cancel out. So anytime you got something like this, it's always going to be a positive and a negative. Always, 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 always. Unless it doesn't factor at all. Like if that was a 6, you could, but it'd be square roots. Those square roots aren't nice. Don't worry about that. That was Miss P going on a tangent. Don't worry about that. You're not going to need to do that. We'll eventually get into ways to solve some of these that aren't going to come out to nice numbers, but that's in the next chapter. Don't worry about that right now. Worry about this stuff. Don't worry about this stuff. You know what I mean. Okay, and there's our answer. And again, any of these, feel free to FOIL them back out and see if they're going to work. So if I FOIL this back, I'm going to ignore this 5a for the moment. I'm going to FOIL that back. I've got an a squared. I've got a minus 2a. I've got a plus a 2a. And I've got this minus 4. Those cancel. So I've got this 5a times this a squared minus 4. 5a times an a squared is a 5, and a to the first times a squared, we're adding our exponents, that's a cubed, minus 4 times 5 is 20. That gets an a. Oh, hey, that's the thing we started off with, so that checks out. And again, that's not the answer, this is the answer. This was just us double checking to see if the answer worked. Feel free to do that, it's a good idea. Alright, so I hope that helped clear up some of the confusion. Please email me if you still have questions. If it's just a matter of you haven't had time to work on it yet, I get that too. Folks are busy, there's a lot of stuff going on. So let me know if you're still having questions or problems, and I will see you next time.